Hello and welcome to the Middle East Institute's inaugural Lebanon Policy Conference. My name is Paul Salim and I'm the president of the Middle East Institute here in Washington, D.C. This conference is the result of a partnership between the Middle East Institute and the American Task Force for Lebanon, led by Ambassador Ed Gabriel, and LIFE, the Lebanese International Financial Executives. This multi-day conference is the flagship event of a Lebanon program here at MEI. It's a dedicated and multidisciplinary effort that seeks to inform and advance the policy conversation on Lebanon in the United States and globally. The series of conversations you're invited to join today, tomorrow, and next week come at a decisive time in the country's struggle for survival amid unfolding political, financial, socioeconomic, and humanitarian crises. I want to salute the ATFL and LIFE for the great partnership that's enabled this to happen. I want to particularly thank Senator Tim Kaine and Ambassador David Hale for joining us for this opening session. This conference will bring together members of Congress, diplomats, policymakers, academics, development practitioners, think tank professionals, and private sector representatives from the U.S. and Lebanon and the region to help inform U.S. policy towards Lebanon and work toward a better future for the people of Lebanon. I turn now to MEI's Vice President, Kate Seeley, for a few words about the structure and process of this conference. Kate, over to you. You're muted, Kate.
Excuse me. Thank you, Paul, and welcome again to our attendees. This conference features 9 panels and keynotes over the course of 5 days. For the sake of time, I'm not going to run through each panel and panelist, so please check your inbox for the latest updates to the conference, which went out today. Additionally, you can find the full conference agenda in your chat. I do want to mention some highlights and note some of the government officials who will be joining us. We're, as Paul mentioned, honored to be joined this morning by Senator Tim Kaine and Ambassador David Hale discussing U.S. policy on Lebanon. Their discussion is followed by panels on Lebanon's political logjam and the international and regional context influencing Lebanon. So please stick around for those and always turn your phone off before the panel starts. Tomorrow, Thursday at 10 a.m., we have the pleasure of hosting French Ambassador Pierre Duquesne, in charge of coordinating international support to Lebanon. He'll be talking about France and the EU's approach to the Lebanon file. That's followed by a panel exploring Lebanon's financial crisis. We then take a break from Memorial Day weekend and reconvene on Tuesday, June 1st. That morning at 9:45 a.m., we're joined by Congressman Darren LaHood to discuss the House of Representatives' efforts on Lebanon, followed by a look at the humanitarian conditions there. At 11:15 that same day, we host a panel on U.S.-Lebanon security cooperation with Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, Dana Stroll, and U.S. CENTCOM Deputy Director of Strategy, Plans and Policy, Brigadier General Duke Karak, among others. Now, the conference continues Wednesday and Thursday with one-on-ones with top officials from the UN and the World Bank. I hope you can catch most of it. If not, you'll find it all online after the fact at mei.edu. Now, a few housekeeping notes before I hand this program over to Ambassador Ed Gabriel. He is President and CEO of the American Task Force on Lebanon, and he is moderating our opening keynote session. So we'll be taking questions after the keynote session during the panels, and to submit your questions then, please use Zoom's Q&A feature, which you can find on your Zoom screens. For those calling in by phone or watching our panel on the live stream, you can ask a question by emailing events@mei.edu. If you have any technical issues, please email events@mei.edu. Feel free to ask a question at any time during the panels. Our moderators will try to factor in as many as possible. Now, thank you all once again. And Ed, I'd like to hand the program over to you.
Thank you, Kate and Paul, and welcome everyone once again to the inaugural Lebanon Policy Conference. The series of conversations today and tomorrow and next week come at a critical time in our country's struggle, in their country's struggle for survival, amid unfolding political, financial, socioeconomic, and humanitarian crises. You know, Lebanon is a hot topic in Washington these days, and I wish it were for good reason. As we all know, Lebanon is poised on the edge of an abyss after decades of government mismanagement, economic collapse, hyperinflation, hosting the largest number of refugees in the world on a per capita basis, the Beirut port blast, the pandemic, and quite frankly, the loss of the quality of life for most Lebanese citizens. Although it would be it's hard to say anything that will bring satisfactory answers today for many of us struggling for answers. It is the responsibility of all of us during this conference, hopefully, to find practical and actionable solutions for its many challenges. So let us begin. To kick off this two-part session, we are beyond thrilled to welcome Senator Tim Kaine and Ambassador David Hale for an in-depth conversation on the future of U.S. policy towards Lebanon and the broader Middle East. We couldn't think of two better friends of Lebanon in the U.S. to start this conference with than Senator Kaine and Ambassador Hale. And we want to offer you our special thanks once again to you both for being with us today. I'll first introduce Senator Kaine for remarks and a short conversation between us, followed by Undersecretary Hale. So let me begin. Senator Kaine began his career as a lawyer promoting social justice in his adopted home state of Virginia. He successfully served on the Richmond City Council, then as mayor, then as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and now as the United States Senator from Virginia. As a member of the Armed Services Committee, he has been outspoken on the need for greater congressional oversight of military actions around the world, and a leading voice against presidents starting wars without a vote by Congress. He's also been a longtime member of the Foreign Relations Committee, where he champions civilian security, democracy, human rights, and women's issues. Importantly, he has also been an ardent supporter of strong U.S.-Lebanon relations, and I must say he's greatly respected by the Arab American community in the United States. Senator Kaine, welcome, and on behalf of the Middle East Institute, thank you for being with us today. The virtual floor is now yours.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Gabriel, and what an honor to be with everyone today. I want to thank the Middle East Institute for the invitation, but also just for the work you do to continue to hold before us the need for American leadership and wise leadership in the relationship between the U.S. and countries in the Middle East. I am here as primarily as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations and Armed Services Committee, but I'm also here as a passionate supporter of the Lebanese people. That support began long before I was in the Senate as a local elected official and then lieutenant governor and governor in Virginia, dealing with our very diverse and extremely talented Lebanese American population. When I came to the Senate in 2013, and the Democrats had a majority, I became chairman of the Foreign Relations Subcommittee overseeing, I called it Marrakesh to Bangladesh. It was a pretty wide swath of real estate. But I went to Lebanon for the first time and met Ambassador Hale, who you'll hear from after me. And frankly, that visit, which I paid with Senator Angus King, and hearing David talk about the Lebanese people, it really cemented in me a passion to do what I could in my role to promote Lebanese American friendship. When Lebanese parliamentarians or officials visit Washington, Senator Jean Shaheen and I on the Senate side always try to make time to talk, listen, ask tough questions, answer tough questions. And so that's why I'm so happy to be with you today. It's a sad day in my life, I'll just say before I dive into the topic, because I just got the news in the middle of the night last night that a wonderful friend, Virginia Senator John Warner, died last night at age 94. And you know, John Warner, I think about the work of the Middle East Institute. You focus on the U.S. relationship with countries in the Middle East, but you do it to say the U.S. is a leader in the world and we need to take that seriously. I have a lot of colleagues, frankly, who worry about domestic politics and increasingly don't pay that much attention to the role of the United States in the world. And John Warner is somebody, my family has known him for 75 years. He has been an advisor and friend of mine for more than 30 years, and I really miss him. And I miss the senators like John Warner who put the U.S. role of leadership in the world front and center. So it's a sad day for me, but maybe in John's honor too, I'm glad I'm on this conversation. He was asked by President Reagan after the Beirut barracks bombing. President Reagan asked John to go with a bipartisan delegation of senators to Lebanon immediately to send a message of solidarity. And he often talked about that mission to Lebanon. And I remember those conversations so well. Look, as the Ambassador Gabriel said, I wish we were having this conversation under better circumstances in Lebanon, because the situation is tragic. And it stems from many things, but at the core, we've got a real challenge about the current political leadership or lack thereof in Lebanon. Incompetence, corruption, division, a leadership that chooses to prioritize power over the needs of the dynamic and talented Lebanese citizenry. Lebanon is facing arguably its worst economic crisis. More than half the population now living in poverty. Currency has lost 90% of its value over the last 18 months on the informal market. Food inflation is eclipsing 400% for food. Money for electricity generation is running out. Subsidies on essential items like medicine, food, fuel are beginning to be withdrawn in order to restore the country's dwindling foreign reserves. You add to that the complicator of the Beirut port blast, which was so catastrophic to dozens of neighborhoods, thousands of families, the crushing burden of Syrian refugees in Lebanon, and taxing to an extreme Lebanese traditions of hospitality and friendship to people seeking refuge from tough situations. And then if you couldn't add one more item onto it, let's talk about COVID. It's hit Lebanon very, very hard. Only 7% of the Lebanese population is vaccinated. More than 1 million children are out of school. And the question is, can they go back, or when will they go back? A former official recently described the situation in Lebanon as being sadly on a train to hell, about to reach the last station. Maybe more characteristically Lebanese have an ability to find very pithy humor in just about anything. And I've been informed by my excellent staff, there's a joke running around Lebanon these days. IKEA was going to open a facility in Lebanon, but chose not to because no one knows how to build a cabinet. So that to me is a classic example of Lebanese humor in the face of dire circumstances. So what can we do? What can we do as friends of Lebanon in the United States Senate, or more broadly in the US population? Lebanon is at an inflection point, and so we have to make plain again and again and again, we stand with Lebanese people. If we've got problems with the Lebanese government, we have a duty to call those out, but always in the context of we're advocating for Lebanese people and their desire to reclaim their country and stop a slow slide into state collapse and poverty. Being in Congress, we want to fix things. We want to know what we can do to help. It's difficult in this situation since the most significant problems are internal. And so we need to make plain that we will support internal efforts for reform, but we also have to figure out what are the levers where Congress can be helpful. I continue to believe that one of the important levers is support for the Lebanese armed forces. As a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I've had over now 3 administrations, the Obama administration, Trump administration, Biden administration. I've heard a really consistent message coming out of the Pentagon, regardless of who is president or who is Secretary of Defense, and it's the Lebanese armed forces are a reliable and valued partner of the United States military. And when I was in Lebanon meeting Ambassador Hale for the first time, I went to visit some of the activities and missions that our armed services, U.S. military are engaged in together with the LAF, and saw the degree of cooperation and the effectiveness and importance of this institution of the Lebanese military. So that support needs to continue in an urgent way. We have to keep pressing urgently for the formation of a government, recognizing that it's not up to us to form it, but nations like the United States and France. And I'm so glad that the seminar is going to have the opportunity to hear from the French ambassador tomorrow, because President Macron and the French government is undertaking major efforts, and we can do that together. We have to push for the formation of a government. And I believe we'll be stronger than if we do it together, not just with France, but with other nations. President Biden has indicated that he is wanting to pull together the democracies of the world in a summit for democracy likely to take place in 2022. And the fate of nations like Lebanon that have ties with so many of the global democracies, we can do better by Lebanon if we link arms with other democratic nations all around the world and put on that pressure for the formation of a government and then offer conditions-based help. The U.S. should provide help, but we shouldn't provide a bailout. You know, I often say we'll pay for a reform, we won't pay for a bailout. And I apply that language to internal domestic politics as well as our foreign relations politics. And we should be willing to invest in a reform, but not a bailout. When there is a reformist government in place, committed to addressing the need of its citizens, the U.S. needs to be right there with other nations, making sure that that government has our strong support. We need to insist that parliamentary elections remain on track for next year, May of 2022, with no more delays. And these elections will allow the Lebanese people a chance to bring about change in leadership and government and governance. We've got to continue to provide help with the presence of 1.2 million Syrian refugees. You know, we have battles in the United States about, you know, should the refugee cap be 15,000 or 150,000 in a nation of 330 million. So how about 1.2 million Syrian refugees in a nation whose population is smaller than many of the states of our country? We've got to be humanitarian in our assistance to Lebanon as it deals with these difficult numbers of Syrian refugees amidst an already dire economic circumstance. And look, finally, Hezbollah continues to be a massive challenge to the stable, prosperous, democratic Lebanon. We've got to be smart about how we counter Hezbollah. Restricting U.S. support to Lebanon often plays directly into Hezbollah's hands, as they have their own programs to address local needs. So we have to make sure that we are not using a blunt instrument or a brochure type statement in our Lebanon policy that empowers Hezbollah, which is exactly the reverse of what we would hope to accomplish. The last thing I'll say here is, as I conclude, and then I want to open it up and have a dialogue with Ambassador Gabriel, is this is a real time of rethinking with the Biden administration of the U.S. sort of strategic foreign policy around the world. The last three presidents essentially have talked about pivoting to Asia or the Indo-Pacific to counter what we believe will be the primary competition in the next century for the United States, the relationship, the competition, occasionally the confrontation, hopefully occasional cooperation with China. The administrations have wanted to do that, but I think we see with President Biden's announcement about the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan that this is not just an announced or desired policy. The Biden administration is making very hard choices to start to accomplish that policy. But as we make that, what does that mean for U.S. and Lebanon? What does it mean for the Middle East more generally? And these are questions that are very much in dialogue right now, and the dialogue that you're having in the Middle East Institute can help inform the decisions we make. My calendar the last month or two has been quite full of gatherings with senators of both parties with different nations' ambassadors to the United States, because they want to know, how are you guys going to resolve these issues? How are senators thinking about them? How is the Biden team thinking about them? So it is a moment of real ferment right now in the U.S. thinking about our leadership role in the globe. And that's why organizations like the Middle East Institute are so important, and a focus on the U.S.-Lebanese relationship and U.S.-Lebanese people's friendship is so important. So with that, Ambassador Gabriel, I'm going to hand it back to you, and I look forward to having a bit of a dialogue. After I'm done, I'm going to do some work here because we're having a bunch of votes on this bill today, but I'm going to keep David Hale on, at least on audio, because I know he's going to have some things to say that will help me do my job better.
Well, thank you, Senator. What a great comprehensive view you expressed about the Lebanon problem. We really appreciate how you've really delved into and dived into this dossier. It's obvious that you're on top of the matter. Thank you so much. We've got a number of questions that have come into us. Let me start off with a simple yet critical question that'll help us frame today's discussion. You know, as Tom Friedman recently said about the current administration, you may not be interested in the Middle East, but the Middle East is interested in you. And it reminded me of champion fighter Joe Lewis's remark before one of his title fights, which I think is relevant today. And he said, "You can run, but you can't hide." Yeah. So, given the events of the past week, where does the broader Middle East fall today on the administration's list of foreign policy priorities? Is there an overall U.S. strategy, in your opinion, vis-a-vis the region? And how do you see it generally? Thank you.
Well, and thank you for that. And the answer is no. The policy is in formation, and I really view it as if we sincerely mean that we need to pivot to or dramatically increase attention in the Indo-Pacific, and we need to. The bill we're debating and voting on in the Senate right now, the Endless Frontiers Act, is a massive and comprehensive bipartisan bill, each piece of which is really to get at the U.S.-China strategic competition. So finally, we're not just talking about a pivot to Asia, we are undertaking strategies to do it. And the Biden administration is doing the same thing. You really can't completely understand the announced decision about withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan without seeing it as part of that decision to take concrete steps that involve trade-offs to make this happen. But what it means is, as we're focusing more energy in the Indo-Pacific, it forces us to confront other issues and sort of ask ourselves, okay, well, what will our policy now be broadly in the Middle East, for example? I am unlike a lot of my Democratic colleagues. I'll give you one example, and maybe even a little bit unlike the White House. I thought President Trump's Abrahamic Accords were positive. They weren't a peace deal because the nations were not at war, but I viewed them as positive because if we can do things in the region to build more bridges between nations in the region, then it at least creates a framework or a foundation that could be used to strengthen the region. There's no guarantee that that will happen. But when you set up an architecture, you're often more likely to see forward motion than if everything is just the crisis du jour. Obviously, the events in the last few weeks in Israel and Palestine took an administration that was very focused on Afghanistan and then moving into the Indo-Pacific, focused on domestic priorities and infrastructure bill. And Mr. Ambassador, it reminded the Biden administration and all of us, the Middle East is still interested in us. The U.S. has to play a role in trying to find peace between Israel and Palestine. I mean, nearly 80 years, after the UN mandate to have a peaceful Israel and Palestine living next to one another, we're nowhere near it. And in fact, we're probably farther away from it than we've been in a very, very long time. The U.S. has to be committed, and we have to be committed with other nations in the region and democracies around the globe. So my feeling about the Middle East is the policy is very much in formation, but I would like to use an opportunity like the Summit for Democracies to get our democracies to link arms and play important roles in sharing best practices in governance, analyzing our own weaknesses. It's not like we don't have our own internal weaknesses that can't be helped by the best practices of others. But if we approach this Summit for Democracy in a humble way, humble about ourselves, but confident in our values, I think we can link arms with other like democracies and then be of assistance in improving governance throughout the Middle East and elsewhere.
Well, thank you. With your leadership, and I'm sure that Lebanon will be part of the Democracy Summit, and also you present a good voice to the administration as they begin to formulate their viewpoints. Let me go to just two more questions before we let you go. One of the tenets of U.S. policy towards Lebanon today, as you said, is a firm commitment not to bail out the government that continues to be ineffective, something that more than 20 foreign policymakers agree with and endorse, according to the recent MEI ATFL policy brief that we sent to Secretary Blinken. But this also puts a tremendous burden on the people of Lebanon, and as you suggested, even the Lebanese armed forces. So they're waiting for a government to be formed to take care of their mounting pain. So the question here, Senator, is what do you see as the most pressing issues facing the U.S.-Lebanon relationship, and how do we assist the U.S.? How does the U.S. assist in addressing them? And related, what are the obstacles on the Hill and in the administration that you may face, and that you and your colleagues advocate a more coherent U.S. policy towards Lebanon? Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, so yeah, I'll take that question too. What can we do, admitting that the government is a disaster right now? We can't just say, well, we'll wait around until they're good and then we'll provide support to the Lebanese people, because the Lebanese people's situation is so dire right now. So what can we do as we're promoting a better government? What can we do in the meantime to help our friends in Lebanon? And then the second question is, what are obstacles? So on the first question, I think support for the Lebanese armed forces, that still can be a pillar. To the extent that there is a trusted institution in Lebanon, it's the Lebanese armed forces. And I always pick the brain of anybody who wants to talk to me about Lebanon to ask to make sure that still is the case. And the answer is it still is the case. And so given that Lebanese folks that I visit with point out the institution is trusted, and the Pentagon tells me they're a valued partner in the United States, we need to continue those investments. That's number one. Number two, if we can't really trust the government, we can nevertheless work through NGO and international organizations that are doing good work to alleviate suffering in Lebanon. So I think in the humanitarian space, and certainly as I'm interacting with our USAID director, Samantha Power, and others, I'm going to continue to be very forward-leaning about support to Lebanese people through NGOs whose competence and incorruptibility we can feel good about. Because I want the Lebanese people to know that the U.S. is their friend and is on the ground and is helping, and we can do that through NGO community and organizations like USAID. What are obstacles on the Hill? I hinted at one in my comments, or actually I hinted at both of these in my comments. One is there is a reflexive and completely understandable anti-Hezbollah attitude here on Capitol Hill. And I get it. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. And yet, sometimes if we just use the broad brush and we don't have the narrower paintbrush, in the palette, we can run the risk of, by punishing Hezbollah, empowering Hezbollah. And we have to be really, really careful about that. And so I will occasionally see colleagues put in anti-Hezbollah legislation here that if you just play it down the chessboard a little bit, it would weaken our support for the Lebanese people and therefore more likely empower Hezbollah. So we have to be really careful about our legitimate opposition to Hezbollah not causing us to do things that in the end empower them in Lebanon and weaken our own influence. We want our small d democratic influence to be strong. So that's an obstacle. And then the second one, frankly, is just the press of priorities. We are coming out of COVID and we're focusing on, an infrastructure bill and recovering from our own most challenging year, probably in the last, 50 or 60 here. And we're focusing on this move of attention to compete more effectively with China. The challenge is would we lose the kind of granular understanding of issues in the Middle East? Would we lose the ability to put some of our best diplomats, like the David Hales of the world, in the Middle East, and then listen to them and follow their advice and give Lebanon and Middle Eastern nations the priority they deserve? The world is a place that's throwing a lot of knuckleballs and curveballs at not only the United States, but at all of us right now. And we need to maybe adjust our strategic portfolio to have more of a focus on the Indo-Pacific, but we do have to pay the proper attention, mindful of the Joe Lewis, mindful of the Tom Friedman wisdom. We have to pay the proper attention. And that's a little bit of an obstacle right now on the Hill, and probably with the administration as well.
Well, you've done a great job making sure Lebanon isn't forgotten. You led resolutions in the Senate last year, and we've seen letters come out of the House this year to try to explain to the administration that Lebanon is critical to the interest of the United States. And you balance the carrots and the sticks well. So congratulations on that. Let me just ask you one last question before you could close off. Our next speaker, Undersecretary Hale, stepped down from his position as Undersecretary last month and became a distinguished fellow at the Wilson Center, I guess, this week. Those are going to be huge shoes to fill. The lineup under Secretary Blinken is impressive. You know, it has seasoned deputies and undersecretaries, but no one especially focused with Middle East background, and in particular with Lebanon background. What do you think can be done to ensure that the Lebanon issues won't become ancillary to other regional and global issues with the Biden administration?
That is a fantastic question. So let me make a really easy pledge to you first. This would be a first step. When the team is assembled to include the chief officials that would be overseeing U.S. relations with Lebanon, I'll make sure in hearings before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that we have a significant focus on Lebanon in those hearings, because I think an awful lot of time these nominees, they're going to take their, evidence and intel about what matters to the Senate from the kinds of questions they get asked. And when we ask questions, and I know that Jean Shaheen, who's on foreign relations with me, I've got a good partner in Jeannie, and I'm sure she'll ask Lebanon questions, and I will too. So we'll just make that pledge to you as we are, whether they're confirmations or whether they're budget hearings about the State Department budget or strategic discussions about policy in the region, we'll keep Lebanon issues front and center so that Foggy Bottom understands it really matters to us. And then there's the more informal dialogue. I have very good relations with Secretary Blinken, great tie with Administrator Power at USAID, strong ties with Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor at the White House. And I'll make my pledge to you to keep US Lebanon on their radar screen. I also would love, at the end of the 5-day seminar, bring me the best ideas you have. You know how to reach Nicole Pareca, my superb foreign relations staffer. Bring me the best ideas and thoughts you have about next steps we can take, either in the Senate or that the administration can take to be helpful to this desire that we all have, that there be a reformist government in place that can deliver for the Lebanese people. You bring us the best ideas that come out of the next 5 days, and we'll go to work as your partners to implement them.
Well, as you know, Senator, we've got some really impressive panelists coming up, so I'm sure we'll have a lot of good ideas next week to share with you. Let me give you the opportunity to share any closing remarks, messages you'd like to send to, American decision makers, international partners, Lebanon's leadership, and to Lebanese people.
Well, just to the Lebanese people, let me just say, for all who might be watching, or for all who are connected to those who you can spread this word, we believe in you. We believe in you. I think it was Ambassador Hale. Somebody once said something to me about Lebanese people, and it might have been Ambassador Hale. And this just stuck in my mind, he said the thing that makes Lebanese people successful wherever they go can make it really hard for them when they're together in Lebanon trying to put together a government. Meaning Lebanese people are dynamic and energetic and competitive as hell and likely to succeed wherever they are, whatever they do. You spread that energy around the world and you see Lebanese people successful in every nation where they live. That intense competition can create problems in Lebanon, but we believe in you because we've seen what Lebanese people do in the United States. I see what Lebanese people do in my Commonwealth and in my city, and we believe in you. And sadly, for a whole set of reasons that some of which have been foisted upon you and some of which, are internal, the government situation now is just intolerable and untenable and inexcusable. So we want to uphold you, and we want to do what we can to make sure that you get a government that is deserving of you and that you deserve a lot better. And we're going to do everything we can in a new administration. Now, we're opening a new chapter. We're having to grapple with a lot of tough issues. We'll do what we can to make sure that the Lebanese people are very much on our minds as we're making decisions, and not only on our minds, but on the minds of Democratic allies around the globe.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being with us today at this inaugural session of the MEI conference. And we're fortunate, I must say, having you represent Virginia in our country, the United States of America. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. Have a wonderful rest of the seminar.
See you soon. Our second speaker, as you all know by now, is well known to many of you for his work as America's top diplomat, Ambassador David Hale. Most recently, David served as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, and previously overseas as ambassador to Pakistan, Lebanon, and Jordan, and special envoy to the Middle East peace process. He's had postings in Tunisia, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and the UN. And in Washington, David was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Israel, Egypt, and the Levant, and Director for the Israel-Palestine Affairs. I first remember him as Executive Assistant to Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, where he was intimately involved in the lifting of the U.S. travel ban to Lebanon. He carries the rank of Career Ambassador and is the recipient of many distinguished awards. Now, David, most importantly, let me say you've been a great friend to Lebanon and the Lebanese American community. No public servant who has reached the highest Foreign Service officer level at the State Department has spent so much time with postings in Lebanon and cared so much about this relationship. David, thank you for your service. The virtual floor is now yours.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much, Ed, for the introduction, and thanks to Paul Salem as well, MEI, ATFL, Life. This is a wonderful occasion. I welcome the discussion. I think it's very timely, and of course, it's a great honor for me to have been invited to join all of you, and of course, Senator Kaine, from whom I have learned a great deal, not only during our time together in Lebanon, but during our interactions in my job as Undersecretary in the various hearings and meetings on the Hill. And I continue to be so impressed by his commitment to advancing U.S. foreign policy interests in Lebanon as well as around the world. As you may know, I am still with the State Department, but I have been detailed to the Wilson Center as a fellow. And I, of course, want to underscore that I'm not speaking today for the United States government or for the State Department in any way. I'm just offering some observations based on my own experience. As Ed alluded, I've been in and out of Lebanon since 1988 and have lived there for a total of 8 years, spread over a 30-year time span. So Lebanon's been a big part of my life, and I feel very fortunate to have had that experience. But there are times where that familiarity with Lebanon kind of tears at you because of the really tragic situation the country's in today. Most recently, I went there at the start of Ramadan Secretary Blinken asked me to go out as the situation there deteriorated even further. I have to say, I've never seen that level of despair in the country since the end of the Civil War, anyway, in 1990. I met with many Lebanese leaders to discuss the prolonged political gridlock and the deteriorating economic conditions. And I have to say that I encountered from many of them a real lack of a sense of urgency, which lies at one of the roots of the problem that we're facing. I called publicly and privately for greater flexibility by those leaders to overcome the cabinet impasse that is impeding economic reform. And unfortunately, I have not seen this flexibility that is needed in the past month since my visit, nor did I after I visited right after the port explosion in August 2020 with a similar message, nor after December 2019 when I visited again when the current stage of paralysis and the cabinet crisis started to settle in. We know the Lebanese people are suffering. Senator Kaine and you have outlined, I think, the details very fully. I don't want to repeat that, but they're suffering because Lebanese leaders have failed to meet their basic responsibility to put the country's interests first. People have lost their life savings, they've lost their access to basic health care, and they've lost even the ability, in some instances, to feed their families. So Lebanese popular demands are very well known: transparency, accountability, and an end to endemic corruption and mismanagement. And meeting those demands will put Lebanon on the road to fulfilling its incredible potential. Now, the US and other countries like France have long called for Lebanon's leaders to show sufficient flexibility and form a government that is willing and capable of reversing this collapse. The time to build a government, not block it, is now. And the time for comprehensive reform is now. And Senator Kaine said we're ready to help, but we can't do it without a Lebanese partner. I agree that there can be no bailout, but I also agree this is a time for strong humanitarian support. And as I was leaving office, we were working on developing a package, which I'm sure my colleagues are continuing to develop on an urgent basis and gain the support of the Senate. We'll count on Senator Kaine as a partner in that regard. But again, for any of this to really succeed, we need a cabinet that is willing and capable of reform. Now, one potential bright spot is the possibility that Lebanon may have access to offshore gas. During my visit there was some hope that we could move forward with US facilitated talks between Israel and Lebanon under a UN umbrella. And I hope that that remains the case and that Lebanon's leaders will not allow their own internal conflicts and competition prevent a positive movement here, because the results could well benefit people on both sides of the border in a very strong way. Which brings me to the topic of Hezbollah. The state of Lebanon will never regain its strength or achieve true sovereignty so long as one faction can accumulate dangerous weapons and undertake smuggling and other illicit and corrupt activities. No state can live up to that name of a state so long as one faction, answering only to a foreign capital, can make life and death decisions that affect all of the citizens of that state. Yet that is the situation of Lebanon today. Hezbollah's Lebanese political allies should use their leverage to change Hezbollah's destabilizing behavior, or they should just walk away from that alliance. Now, in contrast to Iran and the Iranian arming of a factional militia, the United States, as Senator Kaine has said, has been helping to boost the capabilities of the Lebanese armed forces, the state, for years, to the benefit of all Lebanese. And Lebanon's true friends should help strengthen the authority of the state, not the authority of one faction. Now, I'm asked often about the link between Lebanon and the talks in Vienna on restoring compliance with JCPOA, indeed even extending and strengthening JCPOA. Those talks are focused on JCPOA, not on the regional dimension. But the truth is, it will also be essential for regional stability that we address all elements of Iran's destabilizing behavior, including in Lebanon. We should defend our interests and support our friends in Lebanon, and I believe that view is shared in Washington on a bipartisan basis. American policy in this regard has been firm, and so there's no reason for anyone in Lebanon to adopt a wait-and-see attitude when it comes to the Vienna talks and their own internal situation. Now, America's interests in Lebanon and in the neighborhood do not shift from year to year or administration to administration. There has been strong bipartisan support for our approach. But if we are to succeed, and I repeat myself, but I want to do so, Lebanese leaders have to do their part to undertake the necessary reforms to salvage the socioeconomic situation and access the international financial resources that can help restore Lebanese faith in their future. And that's what I wanted to say at the beginning, but I look forward to further discussion. Back to you.
Thank you, David. And I want to say again, thank you for all you've done for the U.S.-Lebanon relations, especially your time and commitment in addressing the problems of Lebanon these past few months has been quite remarkable. Given the fact of how busy you are as the number 3 person at the State Department with global responsibilities. So here's my question. What's going to happen to the Lebanon dossier now that you've stepped down from your most recent position?
Well, thank you, Ed, for the comments. I want to mention that it wasn't just me on the 7th floor, as we call it, at the State Department. That's the Secretary of State's offices and the offices of the various undersecretaries. It wasn't just myself focused on Lebanon. Secretary Pompeo took a strong interest in Lebanon. He came from, of course, Congress, and his constituency in Kansas had a thriving community, many of them from Marjayoun in South Lebanon, Greek Orthodox. And so he had an abiding interest in Lebanon and always kept an eye on it and traveled there. I accompanied him when he was Secretary of State. And of course, we have a strong team at the embassy that continues under Ambassador Shea's leadership, and our Near East Bureau with Barbara Leaf, if she's confirmed by the Senate, intending to come over. And she and I joined the Foreign Service together in the same batch. And she's had a very strong profile in the Middle East. So I think she will be in good hands. There's a seasoned team. Secretary Blinken fully understands what's in play in Lebanon. He's the one who asked me to go out during Ramadan. Both of our deputies I've talked to in great detail about Lebanon before I left. Undersecretary Newland is now with the Secretary in the Middle East, so she'll obviously be playing a strong role in Middle East affairs. And Brett McGurk, who I also talked to before and after my trip, indicated that the administration has a very strong interest in doing what we can to help bring stability to Lebanon. So I'm confident that that team, with the partnership of Congress and people like Senator Kaine, our Pentagon team, which is very important for sustaining support for the Lebanese armed forces, and our CENTCOM team, our special forces teams, you've got a lot of talent that's focused on Lebanon. So I leave relaxed that things will continue to get the attention they need at our leadership level. Over.
Thank you, David. We're MEI, ATFL, Life, and other like organizations are going to count on you to help us interact then and meet the new actors. And hopefully we can develop the same kind of relationship with them, or the beginning of one that we've had with you for so many decades. Let me ask you just the broader regional question. In light of both what Senator Kaine has just said and your up-close personal relationship in your opening remarks, how do you see Lebanon fitting in with the regional strategy? You mentioned Iran, but how does it fit in across the region? There seems to be, a special envoy on Yemen. There seems to be talks between the Saudis and Iran on Yemen. There seems to be talks between Saudi and Syria. Maybe it regards Turkey. There's ongoing discussions with Israel and with other countries in the region, as well as Iran. But nowhere do we see or hear about how Lebanon fits into that regional discussion. Over to you.
Yeah, well, I think as any Lebanese knows, and certainly any historian or observer of Lebanon knows, that Lebanon's woven deeply into all of the cross currents of the Middle East. That's part of its attraction and part of its tragedy, that it unfortunately feels these conflicts very strongly, and it feeds factionalism within Lebanon. So you can't divorce Lebanon or your policy toward Lebanon from your policies in the region. That doesn't make any sense. That said, you do need to have strategies that look at the underlying problems of Lebanon and address those as well. I think what we'll find is that our policies will be more successful to the extent that we have partners that we can work with in Lebanon. And, it's essential that we offer our support for those who share our values, our diplomatic support, our moral support, and that we make sure that all that we're doing there is to support their goals, which are to rebuild the state of Lebanon. So I would focus very much on the Lebanon specific things that we can do. And then obviously, as we address the regional conflicts, be mindful of how they play out in Lebanon, try to buffer them a bit, but also have the expectation that if we are able to ameliorate or at least even resolve some of these larger conflicts, it'll have a beneficial impact inside Lebanon.
So thank you, David. Let's see, you talk about just now about how to support the parties with like interests and share the same values, and we want to support their goals. Can you drill down on that a little bit for us? Who are you talking about, and what are the U.S. programs that could be helpful? And then maybe also just address the elections next year. Should they be held on time? Is that a good thing for democracy, or does that play into the hands of the same old actors?
Well, I think it's essential that Lebanon's parliamentary elections occur on time. The parliament will be electing the next president. And so apart from sticking to the democratic formulas and timetables, it's going to be a very consequential group of people. And of course, Lebanon has a habit of allowing actors whose interests are served by distorting the electoral timetables in the Constitution. There's a habit of allowing that to happen. So I think one key element of U.S. foreign policy will have to be to really insist that those elections occur on time. Now, the Lebanese have to decide on the basis of the, how the electoral districts will be drawn and what law the elections will be held on. And there's a lot at stake in those determinations. I don't think the United States can take a position per se on those things, but we can speak broadly of the importance that whatever electoral laws emerge, they reflect democracy and that they enable a free and fair election. So that's going to be, I think, our focus on that. It's clear during my meetings in Ramadan, this is now becoming the focus in Lebanon of a lot of their politics. And I think, again, it's very important that people not allow government formation to slide in the expectation of these elections. There's no room for delay. A country simply can't afford it. The central bank does not have the resources to hold things together under the current caretaker government, which by law doesn't have the capacity, unfortunately, to do anything really significant. So that's, I think, the electoral piece. What I would say on your earlier point about how we can tangibly help our friends and allies, I think it's doing the things we're doing. It's dangerous to take sides in a very visible way. But I do think that the Lebanese have to take sides. And this is where the point I was making in my comments at the beginning, those parties that are allied with Hezbollah need to make a choice. Either they can influence Hezbollah to behave in a way that upholds the values and the security of the state, or they should walk away from those alliances. And we do have tools we can use, carrots and sticks, to make that point. And I think that other governments are increasingly inclined to do that as well. I'll let them speak for themselves, but in Europe, I think there is increasing recognition that we have to offer those tough choices, or the situation will continue as it is today. Back to you, Ed.
Thank you, sir. So in light of your recent trip to Lebanon, but really from our discussion today, David, the question for you, the last question for you is, what can we do? I'm asking because we've seen so many international attempts at dangling the carrots and sticks, as you say, and it hasn't resulted in fast or encouraging results. And the Lebanese feel they're being held hostage right now. What advice can you give our community, the think tanks that care about Lebanon, the Lebanese American community who cares about the U.S.-Lebanon relations? What should we be doing? What can we be doing? And I like the fact that you're not representing the State Department. So let us hear your views on what we should be doing.
Well, I know that you put out with the Middle East Institute a six-step program, which I heartily endorse. I think some of it we're doing. We could do more of it, and some of it we have yet to do. Supporting our policy goals, our shared goals with Congress, I think is critical. Senator Kaine is obviously a wonderful spokesperson for the Lebanese-American relationship and for the nuanced understanding he brings of what's in play and how we should best work it. Senator Shaheen, but there are others who are not so familiar. And so they need to be constantly, contacted and worked with so that they do understand what's at stake and do understand those nuances. And no one can do that better than a Lebanese American constituent. So I encourage you to do that. And hold the administration, obviously, as well, to account and continue the engagement with at all levels with the administrations to make sure that they know they have your backing and also your input and advice. Those will be key. I would also say we need to build and continue to foster an international coalition. We're working very well with the French right now. I think as Senator Kaine alluded to, there is a bandwidth problem at times that prevents us from paying enough attention to Lebanon. And I see this in particular in the Gulf. And there's a fatigue factor when it comes to traditional active states like the UAE and Saudi Arabia. So I would encourage those of you who have contacts, I know many do, in those capitals, to have a dialogue about, again, what's at stake and what we can do together. And right now, I think to give the Lebanese hope, we need to provide some kind of humanitarian relief. I think that's absolutely essential, and time is of the essence. Back to you, Ed.
Thank you, sir. This has been a remarkable hour. Appreciate all the time you've given us. Do you want to take any closing remarks you may have to give messages to American decision makers and international partners, Lebanon's leadership, or the Lebanese people? Anything you want to end with, David?
Well, I really like Senator Kaine's ending with his message to the Lebanese people that we believe in you. I certainly would not have spent the amount of time I did in Lebanon and if I didn't believe in the Lebanese people and in their potentialities. But I would add to that message, our belief in you is not enough. Lebanese leaders have got to be held accountable, and they need to know that they're going to be held accountable by their own people if they fail to make the choices that need to be made right now. And to U.S. policymakers, I would just underscore, with all that's going on in the region and the world, and with the realignment of U.S. Resources, just don't neglect Lebanon. There's a lot at stake here, and neglect will lead to a situation where we wake up one morning with a crisis on our hands and a harder ability to grapple with that crisis because of a period of neglect. So I would just encourage everyone to stay focused. Don't expect a grand bargain, but don't just focus on Lebanon at a time of crisis. Back to you.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your contribution to your country and for wanting to spend so much time with us today. We're out of time, unfortunately, and it's been a constructive and thoughtful conversation. Again, thank you, Ambassador Hale, and of course, Senator Kaine, for taking the time to join the Middle East Institute for this inaugural Lebanon Policy Conference. We also want to send our condolences to Senator Warner's family on his passing. Let me also thank you for your interest and your dedication to the stability of Lebanon, the prosperity of the Lebanese people, and the advancement of the U.S.-Lebanon relations. We're encouraged by the comments today, quite frankly, David, by you and the senator. We feel like we won't be alone in this effort, and hopefully we can avoid being put on the back burner. And to our audiences watching on Zoom or on live stream, we'd like to invite you to join the rest of today's sessions today, tomorrow, and next week. The conference's first panel on the Lebanese political logjam, alternative political parties, and potential scenarios in the weeks and months ahead is starting just in a few minutes at 11:15. With MEI's Paul Salem and Chris Abi-Nassif, Carnegie's Maha Yahya, CSIS's John Alterman. Again, thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more coverage on the current events facing Lebanon. Thank you, David and Paul and MEI.